Hello, everybody, and welcome to a slightly different podcast episode today. As you know, my name is Emily, and today it's just me. I'm going to be explaining a pronunciation topic, so I decided that I was going to do a little solo episode explaining something that a lot of people find quite difficult to understand and also to pronounce, and that is the glottal stop. So maybe you've heard about the glottal stop before, and maybe this isn't news for you, but I feel like it would be a good idea to discuss this topic anyway, just because a lot of people ask me to say the same expressions every single time I go live on TikTok, or every single time they see me in a video, they leave a comment that says, say this, say this. And the first example is bottle of water. Now, you might be a little bit disappointed because I didn't say it in the way that you wanted me to say it. I pronounced the t sound in bottle of water. I would say that most people pronounce the t sound in RP, and RP is received pronunciation. So when you think about, for example, the royal family or the upper classes, the kind of British people who hunt foxes and eat pheasant for dinner, and all of these kinds of people, these are the types of people who might use the t sound in every single word that they see. These people are also invited to present on the BBC, although nowadays the BBC is much more modern and you can find lots of different accents instead of just the usual RP pronunciation. I'm not an RP speaker, shockingly enough. For those of you who already know me quite well, this is not news to you, but in case you didn't know, I am from a city in England called Sheffield, which geographically is in the middle of the UK, but it is actually in the north of England. And so this kind of glottal stop pronunciation is quite common where I am from. That doesn't mean that it's exclusive to people in the north of England, though. If you go to the south, to London, for instance, it's really common to find the glottal stop in East London because there aren't a lot of RP speakers there. Lots of people get confused with British English. It seems that you can maybe walk for 20 minutes and find a completely different accent, and the truth is that is completely accurate. That is completely true. So it's quite frustrating sometimes to go to the UK or to speak to a British person and discover that there are so many different accents. I think this is a topic for a future podcast episode, though, so I'll leave that there. So like I said, I like to pronounce my T's because I have a bit of an English teacher voice, so sorry about that, guys. However, even though I have an English teacher voice, there are plenty of words that I have already said with a glottal stop, and perhaps you haven't even realized it. For example, words that end in T, like that or accurate, which is a word that I said before. I could say the t sound at the end there, but it's very common for me to just say that, but, right? Accurate. So just from listening to that difference between that and that, but and but, accurate and accurate, maybe you are thinking, I can't hear the difference. Or maybe the idea that you're getting is that the t is just disappearing. But it's actually a bit more complicated than that. The glottal stop is a symbol in the phonetic alphabet. And the reason why it is a symbol in the phonetic alphabet, just like every other sound, is because your body, your throat, your diaphragm has to do something to make this sound, this non-existent sound. For example, let's use the bottle of water example. I say bottle of water, bottle of water. Okay, I'll say it again. Bottle of water, bottle of water. Okay, people often, when they are trying to replicate the sound, they say ball of war, like that. The issue is that this kind of pronunciation, ball of war, doesn't take into account the sound of the glottal stop. It is a stop, okay, sure, but what is happening inside your body? Well, your vocal cords are actually closing. So it's not just a continuous wa sound, it's wa. So my vocal cords are closing to produce the glottal stop sound. It's crazy, right? We use it quite a lot in English, and I want to talk about some examples where you might see it. For example, I already discussed that these very short words that end in T, like I just said short, but actually short is a better way of saying that. Fat, but, that, get, bet. You can hear the glottal stop in every single one of these. It can be quite frustrating to listen to a British person and not recognize these. So, for example, do you want to make a bet? Do you want to make a bet? Do you want to make a bet? This is another concept where we take do you want to and turn it into Joanna. That can be quite difficult as well. This is called elision, where we take a lot of words and we push them together. It can also be used in comparatives where you have two T letters and then an ER at the end. So water is not a comparative, but it is a word with TER. Fatter, better. Okay, these are comparative words. Or really any word that ends in TER. So for example, partner would be very hard to say. So really it would be better to say partner, partner, partner. Okay, I'm closing my vocal cords, partner. Here's an interesting thing, and I've said this to quite a lot of you. If you follow us here on YouTube, if you follow us on TikTok, I've made a video about this in the past. When we say the glottal stop, or when we teach the glottal stop, the automatic reaction from all of my students is that they say, well, Emily, I can't do this because it doesn't exist in my language. And I always say, well, are you sure about that? For example, what do you say when you make a mistake? What do you say when you make a mistake? You go, uh-oh, uh-oh, uh-oh. That is a glottal stop. We naturally make this sound quite frequently, and this is not the only situation where you see this sound. A lot of people think that the glottal stop is associated to the letter T, and that's also not necessarily true. For example, in the word background, where do you hear the k sound? Background, background, background. Can you hear the word or the sound k, k, k? I can't. Background would be very difficult to say. So actually, the glottal stop is replacing another sound here in English because it's simply difficult to pronounce. And I can promise you that you have already been pronouncing background properly. So isn't that interesting? Okay, I have one more thing that I want to say before we finish this topic. The issue with the glottal stop is that a lot of people think that they need to be able to pronounce it. They ask questions like, when should I use it? What do I do? How do I do it? When do I do it? Do I do it with my boss or do I do it with my friends? And I don't think that these are the types of questions that we should be asking. Just because a pronunciation characteristic exists in the language that you are trying to learn doesn't mean that it is a pronunciation element that you need to learn as well. I think that a lot of English teachers would avoid teaching the glottal stop because it's not RP English, it's not proper English, or it's not considered appropriate English for speakers. I would not say that, because I think it's important to understand when this word appears. So like I said before, you can find it in lots of different parts of the UK. People tend to use it in less formal situations, but this is not something that people try to limit in formal situations. So you might also hear glottal stops from people with specific accents in a formal context as well. So with all of that said, do I think that it's necessary for you to use it? No. However, in the same way that linguistic characteristics like elision or colloquialisms are important to learn, they're not always important to learn in order to use them. Not every sentence needs an idiomatic expression or a phrasal verb or a colloquialism or some slang or whatever. Not every sentence needs that, but every sentence that you hear needs to be understood by you. And for that reason, learning the glottal stop is important, and recognizing the glottal stop when you're listening to other people is a really, really great way of practicing your listening skills. Even subconsciously saying to yourself, oh, that was a glottal stop. Oh, that person used a glottal stop there. Oh, hey, look, I'm using the glottal stop every time I say, oh, oh. So I really think it could be valuable for you to notice it, but not necessarily to use it. I hope that you were able to hear the glottal stop in plenty of different scenarios in this particular episode. If you heard the glottal stop in a place where you didn't expect to hear it, let me know. I own a podcast, so I try to make sure that every word is pronounced properly. But I hope that this episode was interesting to you if you hadn't heard of the glottal stop before. And I hope that you even practiced it a little bit there with words like uh-oh or background, okay? If you can think of any more examples, go ahead and write them in the comments. Thank you for listening, as always. I really appreciate that you take some time in your week to listen to our podcast. And I will see you around. Have a fantastic day.